Alright, this is my project I did for my French class. It's the Battle of France, 1940 May. And I have a map here, and I've created all the bunkers. And a lot of people might not know that France did surrender in World War II, but they did. And a lot of people would wonder, oh, why didn't they build a fortification? Well, they did. This was called the Maginot Line, and it was extended from the Swiss border all the way to the English Channel. So you may wonder, how did France fall, even if they did have this massive fortification progress that they did from 1929 to 36. You may look at this, and it doesn't really show terrain, but I drew in the terrain with rivers, but there's no mountains. The Maginot Line is situated here on the Vosges, which was a mountain range around the province of Alsace-Lorraine. And then it was across the Rhine River, which goes up to Holland. So it's already in a really good place. But then what happened in World War I with the French military is the Germans activated a plan called the Schlieffen Plan, where they invaded through Belgium to try to take Paris to get around the massive fortifications. So the French obviously knew about that and were going to be ready for the next war if there was one, which there was. So they built forts on Belgium too, because Belgium renounced a treaty in 1936, so the French couldn't build forts in Belgium anymore. So they had to exclude Belgium from the plan. But here is the Ardennes Forest and mountain ranges in Wallonie, which is the southern region of Belgium, which is very mountainous and has a lot of forest. So it's not very good terrain for maneuver warfare, which the German Panzer program was the most powerful military force on the planet so far. So if the French could utilize the terrain to their advantage, then the Germans wouldn't be able to bust through. So their initial plan was to rush their infantry up into Belgium when Belgium joined the Allies and protect on geographically strong positions, such as the Meuse River. And once that defense broke, they'd pull back to the Sambre River. And once that failed, they'd pull back to Brussels. And once that failed, they'd pull back finally to the French border, and the German forces would be too weak to invade. So France would be protected. But what the French didn't suspect is that the Germans would use their tanks in the Ardennes. Because it's so well forested, the French didn't put many forts there. So when the 10th Panzer Corps eventually broke through Belgium and started to pass into France, they were really worried because they didn't have great troops on the Maginot, because the Maginot is a really great defense. Why waste your good troops on that? And all their best troops were in Belgium, including their tank divisions. So they had a meager defense force across a river, across the Meuse River, across a bridge. And their plan was that if the tanks attacked, or anything attacked, they'd move their infantry forward to defend. But the panzers were too fast, and they broke across the bridge, and they were able to set up a good foothold. So by the time the French infantry arrived, they couldn't take back the bridge. And the tank forces were too far up in Belgium to divert them back down. So now the Germans had crossed the Meuse River and were open into the plains of France. So through ghost divisions, a tactic that Rommel employed, where they'd plunge so far into enemy territory that the German high command wouldn't know that they were there, he drove his tanks all the way up to Calais, to the English Channel, and encircled all of the best French and British forces in Belgium. And because of that, they had to evacuate, and then they escaped at Dunkirk, which was one of the greatest military actions ever done in all of history, probably the best thing done in World War II, because it saved over 600,000 Allied soldiers. And the main reason the Germans didn't push on that is because they thought they could still allow peace to Britain after they beat France, because if they had killed all their forces, Britain most likely wouldn't have wanted to surrender, because that's kind of an atrocious thing. But after all their forces had fallen apart, their troops on the Maginot Line couldn't hold much longer, so the Germans broke through that, and then they set up a defense force for a final defense on Paris called the Weygand Line, which was named after their field marshal, Maxime Weygand. And though they just were too weak, they didn't have enough troops and they were spread too thin, so the Germans were able to bust through across all the defenses, and eventually they entered Paris with no shots fired, and France capitulated. And that's why I put Vichy in here, because the second armistice at Compiègne happened in the same railway car that the French had the Germans surrender to them in World War I. So it's kind of ironic. And then I have this biplane here just because the French Air Force was completely not up to date to fight Bf-109s, but that was somewhat fine because the British Air Force was. But that didn't really matter much. And that's my project. The Battle of Sedan and the Battle of France.